weeks ago. He says, God is what happens to a person on the way to becoming human. Is that Jesus represents the human face of God made radically visible on earth. We know that our understanding of Jesus has changed quite enormously and very significantly, in which he often wrote about and talked about the community that is Jesus, that our faith as a Christian people is foundationally a communal faith. The self-understanding that Jesus was operating out of was one of a relational personhood rather than an egocentric personhood, because it does seem he left the company of John the Baptist and opted for a different strategy, which in many ways was away from the ascetical approach towards the more celebratory one of life, fully divine and fully human. Well, you can't be fully human unless you make mistakes. That's part of what it means to be fully human. So yes, Jesus did make mistakes, and therefore the two words empowerment, in and through mutuality, in and through community process. That's the radical new bit that Jesus was onto. And I find it very important from an adult perspective. He never gives them a straight, simple answer. It's almost like he invites them to begin to reclaim the adult within themselves and begin working it out. And so he talks to them in parables. Whereas we put a lot of emphasis on the preaching and the teaching, which of course gives us a sense of power and a sense of priority. If we honor this deeper tradition of the companionship of empowerment, that for Jesus, it's the healing and the commensality that come first. So when we talk about Jesus expelling the spirit, is an engagement with the hurt, broken person, calling them forth into a place of greater wholeness, where they can now begin to meet their needs in more legitimate ways. And I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that Jesus ignored and transcended several of the laws, rules, and regulations around sharing food at table. So that commensality is a deep, sacred part of our faith story that we do need to reclaim and have a fresh look at. And said, to Jesus and the new reign of God. In other words, it's almost saying, to hell with you Romans and your imperial stuff. We now have a new companionship of which we're all a part. We're about a whole new way of doing power. Now, when Jesus is talking about the companionship, it's not companionship just about human beings. It's a companionship that must include all the creatures that share creation with us. The meaning of person. So we're not getting rid of the meaning of personhood, we are redefining it. I am at all times the sum of my relationships, and that's what defines my identity. Now, this guy, Andreas Weber, in the New Biology says, we need to start with feeling, not with instinct. And so his first question would be, what does the tree actually feel? What does the plant actually feel? What does the animal feel? That takes you into the archetype, into the bigger picture. The archetype is pushing us to engage ever more deeply with the challenges and implications of deeper relationality, of deeper relationships, always aiming towards a more communal way of being and of doing. I am at all times the sum of my relationships, and that's what confers identity upon me. I am at all times the sum of my relationships, and that's what leads to my fundamental identity in religions. But all the religions also evolve under the shadow of the patriarchal system and inevitably carry dimensions of it right down to our own time. Yeah, I'm not denying, we're not denying the need for some hierarchical structures, but they need to be flexible and pliable and operating out of a consciousness that's always looking out for how do we include people and how do we empower people so that we can all work together more collaboratively. The idea of ordaining women into that system could make the situation worse rather than remedy it. I think we need to look at whole new paradigms of ministry and maybe leave the notion of ordination aside for a while, and think instead about who in our community would have special skills for facilitating rituals, for building community. So post-colonialism is not what happens after a colonial period. Post-colonialism is about the baggage that endures long after the colonizers have left. The baggage of colonialism can last for a long, long time, long after the colonizers have left, as the male, white, celibate cleric. And unfortunately, those become key features then of what we began to understand by divinity. That divinity has something to do with the power of the male, the primacy of the male over everything else in creation, and that the female represents something that's not fully authentic in the eyes of God. Celibate, in the understanding coming from Trent, is a quality of holiness equal to God himself. And I remember in my novitiate being told that basically means that you try to live like an angel rather than a human being. And I ask God to forgive the people that give us that teaching, because I think that left us with a lot of psychological and emotional damage. So, now, in my estimation, capitalism is based on a lie, because the truth is we live in a creation of abundance. There's more than enough for everybody if everything was equally shared.